Gaslight flickered over a world of grand invention and profound mystery. The Victorian era holds secrets that defy even our modern understanding. By the end of this journey, you will know the truth behind 30 of its most baffling events, from a ship found sailing without a soul on board to the phantom that terrorized London with leaps of fire. How did an entire village simply vanish into thin air, and what monstrous secret was walled up inside a Scottish castle? What does it truly take for a story to survive more than a century without ever being solved? The vast Atlantic Ocean held a secret in December 1872. A British ship named the Day Gracia spotted another vessel, the Mary Celeste, sailing erratically without a soul in command. When the crew of the Day Gracia boarded the merchant brig, they stepped into a perfect and profound mystery. The ship was completely seaworthy, its hull sound and its cargo of industrial alcohol largely intact. Yet every single person was gone. 10 souls had vanished without a trace. The scene on board was deeply unsettling. A meal was laid out on the table, as if someone had just stepped away for a moment. The crew's personal belongings, their clothes and their pipes, were all still in their quarters. The ship's logbook was found, its last entry entirely mundane. The only lifeboat was missing, suggesting a frantic, perhaps orderly, abandonment. But why would an experienced captain and his crew leave a perfectly sound ship in the middle of the ocean? The theories began almost immediately. Some whispered of pirate attacks, but there was no sign of a struggle, no bloodshed, no plunder. Others, with a more superstitious bent, spoke of sea monsters or a sudden kraken attack rising from the depths. More rational minds proposed a sudden fear of the alcohol fumes exploding, or a terrifying waterspout that convinced them the ship was sinking. Yet none of these explanations fully fit the eerie, peaceful tableau left behind. The Mary Celeste remains one of history's great enigmas, a ghost ship found in perfect condition, its human cargo forever lost to the silent, indifferent sea. While the sea kept its silent secrets, the very streets of London were gripped by a terror that could leap over rooftops. This was no ordinary criminal, but a figure straight out of a nightmare known only as Spring-Heeled Jack. His reign of panic began in 1837, and his description was as unbelievable as it was terrifying. Witnesses described a tall, thin figure with glowing red eyes who wore a dark cloak and a helmet. Some said his hands were tipped with metallic claws, sharp enough to tear at clothing and skin. But his most impossible trait was his power to jump to impossible heights, vaulting over walls and entire buildings in a single bound, landing with a force that suggested springs on his boots. He would often vanish into the night with a mocking, echoing laugh. One of the most chilling encounters was with a young woman named Jane Alsop. One evening, a man knocked on her door, claiming to be a police officer and urgently calling for a light. When Jane brought a candle, the man breathed a blast of blue and white flame directly into her face. As she recoiled in shock and pain, he seized her, his sharp metal claws scratching her arms and neck as she screamed and fought to break free. She managed to pull away and slam the door shut, but the image of the fire-breathing phantom was seared into her memory. Her story was not an isolated one. Other reports flooded in, describing similar attacks where the creature would spit fire and use his claws before making his impossible escape. The city was thrown into a frenzy of mass hysteria. The police were inundated with sightings, and vigilante groups patrolled the streets, armed and jumpy. Newspapers fanned the flames of fear, printing every rumor and alleged encounter. Who or what was Spring-Heeled Jack? The theories were as wild as the sightings themselves. Some pointed a finger at a mad aristocrat, the Marquess of Waterford, known for his cruel pranks. Others wondered if it was a circus performer with a twisted sense of humor, using his acrobatic skills and theatrical tricks to terrify the public. Yet no one was ever caught or conclusively identified. Spring-heeled, Jack transcended a simple crime wave to become a permanent fixture of Victorian folklore. He was a monster who perfectly captured the anxieties of the age, a time of rapid industrialization and unsettling scientific progress. He was a living, breathing urban legend, a manifestation of the fear that just beyond the warm glow of the gas lamp, something unnatural and unstoppable was waiting. The public's reaction was a strange blend of sheer terror and morbid fascination, buying penny dreadfuls and attending stage shows that dramatized his exploits. He was their own homegrown boogeyman, a mystery that walked and leaped among them. While London was still whispering about its leaping phantom, a far more earthly terror was unfolding on the continent, one tied to the shadowy world of international espionage. In November 1809, a young and promising British diplomat named Benjamin Bathurst vanished into the cold German air. He was on a desperate, secret mission, attempting to forge an alliance with Austria against Napoleon, and the pressure was immense. Witnesses reported he had become increasingly paranoid, convinced that French agents were watching his every move. His journey home should have been a moment of respite. Stopping at an inn in the small town of Perleberg, he paused to dine with his companion. After the meal, he stepped outside into the courtyard to check on his traveling carriage before their departure. He walked around to the far side of the horses and simply ceased to exist. He was never seen again. The investigation that followed was swift and thorough, yet it yielded almost nothing. The only clues were two items found discarded near the inn stable, his expensive fur coat and a single pistol. It was as if the man had been plucked from the face of the earth, leaving behind only these strange, silent tokens. How could a high-profile diplomat, surrounded by people in a busy inn-yard, disappear so completely and so instantly? The theories were as dark as the political landscape. The most compelling pointed directly to political assassination. French agents were known to operate throughout the region, and silencing a key British envoy would have been a major victory for Napoleon's intelligence network. Perhaps he was ambushed, silenced, and his body hidden before anyone could raise an alarm. Others wondered about a more personal motive, a simple robbery that turned fatal, though his valuables were left untouched in the carriage. And then there were the wilder, more desperate explanations whispered in the press. Some, baffled by the lack of any trace, even suggested the fantastical idea of spontaneous human combustion, that he had somehow been instantly consumed by an inner fire. Yet none of these theories ever provided a satisfactory answer or produced a body. The strange disappearance of Benjamin Bathurst became more than a single mystery. It transformed into a powerful symbol of its era. It captured the pervasive fear and paranoia of the Napoleonic Wars, where a man could be erased not on a battlefield, but in a quiet courtyard, a victim of invisible enemies and international intrigue. His story served as a chilling reminder that in a world of secrets, a single step into the shadows could be your last. Just a short time after a diplomat vanished into thin air, a different kind of horror was festering beneath the very floorboards of a London home. In August 1849, a man named Patrick O'Connor, a quiet customs officer, was reported missing by concerned friends. Their investigation led them to a seemingly respectable house in Bermondsey, occupied by a Swiss woman named Mary Manning and her husband, Frederick. The couple had already fled, but the police soon discovered why. After noticing a terrible smell and a suspiciously fresh patch of cement in the kitchen, officers began to dig. Just a few inches below the surface, they uncovered the horrifyingly decomposed body of O'Connor, buried in a quicklime pit directly under the Mannings' kitchen floor. He had been shot in the head. The public was instantly gripped by what the newspapers would soon call the Bermondsey horror. The motive was a brutal mix of greed and betrayal. Mary Manning had been O'Connor's lover before her marriage, and he was a man of some wealth. The Mannings had lured him to their home, murdered him for his money, and then coolly went about cashing his dividend warrants to fund their escape. Their flight did not last long. They were apprehended separately, Marie in Edinburgh and Frederick in Jersey, and brought back to London to face trial. The trial was a sensational media circus with every sordid detail of the affair, the murder, and the callous burial devoured by the public. The Mannings were found guilty and sentenced to be hanged. On a cold November morning, they were brought to the Horsemonger Lane jail for a very public execution. The crowd that gathered was immense, a seething mass of humanity estimated at over 30,000 people. Among them, watching from a private window with a deep sense of morbid fascination and social concern, was the author Charles Dickens. The spectacle of the double execution and the carnival-like atmosphere of the bloodthirsty crowd horrified him. He would later write a passionate letter to the Times condemning the barbaric practice of public hangings, arguing that such displays corrupted the public soul. The case of the Mannings did more than supply a grisly story. It became a catalyst for change. The notoriety of the murder and the disturbing reaction to the execution fueled a growing movement that would eventually lead to the end of public executions in Britain. Yet, in its own time, the story was perfectly packaged for mass consumption. It became a staple of the penny dreadfuls, those cheap and sensational serials that fed the public's appetite for true crime. The Bermondsey Horror had everything: a beautiful but deadly femme fatale, a weak-willed husband, a wealthy victim, and a body hidden in the most intimate and terrifying of places, the home itself. It was a stark reminder that the most profound evils were not always supernatural phantoms, but could fester behind a veneer of respectability right under your feet. Even as Londoners recoiled from the horrors hidden beneath a kitchen floor, a far more pervasive and public menace was rising from the city's very heart. The River Thames, the majestic waterway that had sustained the metropolis for centuries, was slowly transforming into a monstrous open sewer. For years, the city's waste had flowed directly into the river, a cocktail of human excrement, industrial chemicals, and animal carcasses. This growing environmental disaster reached its horrifying climax during the sweltering summer of 1858, an event that would be remembered in history with perfect, blunt accuracy as the Great Stink. The weather was unusually, oppressively hot. Week after week, the sun beat down upon the sluggish, thickening waters of the Thames, baking the foul mixture into a gaseous, putrid cloud that engulfed the entire city. The stench was beyond description, a physical presence that made the eyes water and the stomach turn. It was so overpowering that it seeped into the grand halls of the Houses of Parliament, located right on the river's edge. The politicians and lords, the very people who had long ignored the problem, were now its most prominent prisoners. In a desperate attempt to conduct business, they soaked the building's curtains in a solution of chloride of lime, a harsh chemical disinfectant, hoping to mask the smell of decay with the scent of a hospital. The measures were useless. The stench was inescapable, clinging to clothing, food, and the very air they breathed. The debate about relocating the entire government away from the river became a serious topic of discussion, not out of convenience but out of sheer survival. How could the center of the world's largest empire be brought to its knees by a smell? This was no mere nuisance. It was a public health crisis of the most urgent kind. For decades, physicians had been warning of the connection between foul air, or miasma, and disease. The cholera epidemics that had repeatedly ravaged London were traced back to the contaminated water of the Thames, which people were still drinking. The Great Stink made the invisible danger terrifyingly tangible. You could not see the cholera bacteria in the water, but you could not escape the reek that signaled its presence. The crisis finally forced Parliament to act, and they turned to a brilliant, pragmatic engineer named Sir Joseph Bazalgette. His plan was monumental, a visionary network of intercepting sewers that would run for over 80 miles parallel to the Thames. These massive underground tunnels would catch the city's waste before it reached the river and channel it east, far away from the central city, where it could be pumped out to sea. It was one of the most ambitious civil engineering projects the world had ever seen. The irony is as thick as the air was that summer. For years, the slow, invisible poisoning of the population had been met with bureaucratic delay and political indifference. It took a smell, a visceral, undeniable assault on the senses of the powerful, to finally spur the action that saved countless lives. The Great Stink was a strange event indeed, a historical turning point born not from a battle or a treaty, but from a collective gasp of disgust. Bazalgette's sewers did not just clean the river, they fundamentally reshaped the city above, creating the iconic Thames embankments and laying the foundation for modern public health. It stands as a stark lesson that sometimes the most profound progress requires a crisis that is impossible to ignore. The same era that produced the Great Stink also gave birth to an object of haunting superstition, a simple painting that would one day ignite a modern curse. Its subject was a weeping child, rendered with heartbreaking realism by the Italian artist Giovanni Bragolin in the early 20th century. These mass-produced prints, often titled The Crying Boy, became incredibly popular in the decades that followed, hanging in countless homes with their melancholic charm. But in the 1980s, a bizarre pattern emerged that transformed this piece of kitsch decor into an object of pure terror. Firefighters across Britain began reporting a strange and recurring discovery amidst the ashes of house fires. They would find a home completely gutted, a blackened ruin of charred timber and melted possessions, and there, often leaning against a lone surviving wall or resting untouched on the floor, would be the print of the crying boy, completely unscathed. The glass in its frame would not even be cracked. How could one cheap print survive a blaze that consumed everything around it? The logical explanation was simple science. Firefighters deduced that the print's hardboard backing acted as a shield, and the painting was often hung over a fireplace or mantelpiece, areas that are sometimes more protected from the initial spread of flames. But logic is no match for a good story. The reports coalesced into a full-blown urban legend, a curse that claimed the painting brought catastrophic bad luck and devastating fires to any household that owned it. Newspapers eagerly printed the tales, and soon a moral was attached to the mystery. The legend grew that the artist Bragolin had originally painted a real orphan boy. The studio where the child was posing supposedly caught fire, and the boy tragically died in the blaze, his dying curse placed upon his own image. It was a perfect, tragic backstory, even if there was no evidence it was true. The public's reaction was a fascinating mix of fear and dark humor. People began actively discarding their copies of the painting, some even holding public burnings to destroy the cursed object. Fire stations were reportedly inundated with people trying to surrender their prints. The crying boy became a staple of tabloid folklore, a tangible symbol of bad luck you could buy at a flea market. This modern panic, however, has its roots firmly in the Victorian mindset. The 19th century was a golden age for mass-produced sentimentality and a deep fascination with the supernatural. It was an era that loved a good ghost story and saw omens in everyday objects. The Crying Boy curse is a direct descendant of this tradition, a Victorian-style moral fable updated for the 20th century. It blended the era's artistic sentiment with its superstitious heart, creating a legend that asked a chilling question: can a simple image born from one tragedy carry the spark of another? The painting's survival in the ashes was not seen as a quirk of physics, but as a ghostly taunt, a lonely, weeping child forever immune to the very destruction he was said to bring. Far from the crowded, stinking streets of London, another kind of mystery was locked away within the thick stone walls of a Scottish castle. Glomy's Castle, a sprawling fortress with a history stretching back centuries, held a secret so dark that even its own noble owners were rumored to be forbidden from knowing it. This was the legend of the Monster of Glomys, a tale of a hidden heir whose very existence was a source of shame and terror. The story centered on a specific, sealed room, a chamber constructed within the castle's labyrinthine layout to permanently conceal a member of the Bowes-Lyon family, the ancestors of the Queen Mother. According to the whispers, this hidden occupant was a monstrous child, born so severely deformed that the family decided to wall him up from the world, ensuring their lineage would never be tainted by the scandal. The descriptions of this unfortunate soul varied wildly, feeding the legend with gruesome details. Some accounts described him as a vampire-like creature, living in darkness and sustained by some unholy means. Others claimed he was a man with no neck, his head sitting directly on his shoulders. The most haunting description was of a being with a large, egg-shaped body and tiny, flipper-like limbs, a figure of pure biological tragedy. The mystery was not confined to the sealed room itself. Victorian servants and brave guests who stayed at the castle reported a constant, unsettling atmosphere. They spoke of strange, muffled noises echoing from behind walls, sounds that could not be explained by the ordinary settling of an old building. Some claimed to have seen a pale, distorted face peering from a window in a part of the castle that was supposed to be completely empty and sealed off. Why would a family go to such extreme lengths to hide one of their own? The Victorian era was obsessed with pedigree, reputation, and the perceived purity of aristocratic bloodlines. The birth of a severely disabled heir would have been seen as a catastrophic blight on the family's honor, a divine judgment or a throwback to some primitive ancestor. The pressure to maintain a perfect public facade was immense, creating an environment where such a cruel solution could be imagined, if not actually carried out. The legend grew so powerful that it was said only the current Earl of Strathmore and his immediate heir were allowed to know the truth. When a new heir came of age, he would be taken to the hidden room and shown the terrible secret, a rite of passage that bound him to a lifetime of silence. This element made the mystery perfectly Gothic, a classic tale of ancestral sin and a curse passed down through generations. The truth of what, if anything, was actually hidden in Glommer's castle has never been confirmed. Later investigations and renovations found no evidence of a sealed room, though the castle's complex architecture, with its false walls and dead-end corridors, leaves ample room for doubt. The monster of Glommer's endures not as a proven historical fact, but as a powerful cultural artifact. It is a story that exposes the darkest fears of the Victorian aristocracy, the terror of imperfection, and the monstrous secrets that can fester behind a facade of nobility and grace. The dark secrets of Scottish castles were a world away from the vast, frozen silence of the Canadian Arctic. Yet both landscapes produced tales of inexplicable disappearances. Decades after the Victorian era closed, a story emerged that felt like a relic from that age of exploration, a mystery so absolute it seemed to swallow an entire community. In November 1930, a fur trapper named Joe Labelle was traveling through a remote region near Lake Anjikuni. He was familiar with the local Inuit village, a community of about 30 people, and looked forward to the warmth of their company. But as he approached, an unnatural stillness hung in the air. He found the settlement completely deserted. The scene was one of suspended animation, a life interrupted in mid-breath. Pots of food, now frozen solid, still hung over cold fire pits. Personal belongings, like precious rifles that no hunter would ever willingly abandon, lay inside the huts. Even the community's sled dogs were found, dead from starvation and tied to a tree, a detail that seemed particularly cruel. Most chilling of all, Labelle reported discovering the village cemetery. The graves had been opened, and the bodies that had been buried there were gone. How does an entire village simply cease to exist, leaving every sign of their daily life behind? The story, first published in a 1931 newspaper article, instantly captured the public imagination, echoing the Victorian fascination with vanished civilizations and the unforgiving mysteries of the polar regions. It was a tale that ticked every box of a classic mystery, suggesting a sudden, forced exodus or an otherworldly intervention. Theories, of course, ran wild. Some speculated about a malevolent, unseen force or even alien abduction. Others proposed a more grounded, though equally terrifying, possibility of a violent raid by a rival group, though no signs of a struggle were ever documented. The official explanation from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police was far more mundane. They later stated that Labelle's account was heavily embellished and that the village was actually a seasonal camp that had been gradually abandoned over time, a process he had misinterpreted in the harsh winter landscape. Most modern researchers and historians now consider the story a prime example of a sensational journalistic hoax, a spooky story crafted to sell newspapers during a slow news cycle. Yet the legend of the Anjikuni villagers endures with a strange power. It resonates because it taps into a primal fear, one the Victorians understood deeply, the fear of being utterly erased. It is the ultimate colonial anxiety, the idea that a whole culture, a whole way of life, could vanish from the earth without a trace, leaving only silent huts and empty graves under the immense, indifferent Arctic sky. The same human desire for discovery that sent ships to the Arctic also made people believe they could find life on the moon. In August 1835, a New York newspaper called The Sun began publishing a series of extraordinary articles claiming they were reprints from a respected scientific journal in Edinburgh. The reports detailed the astounding findings of the celebrated astronomer Sir John Herschel, who, using a monstrous new telescope of his own design, was supposedly observing civilization on the lunar surface. The descriptions were lavishly detailed and utterly fantastical. Herschel's telescope allegedly revealed vast forests of strange trees and oceans with beaches of brilliant white sand. The animal life was like something from a dream or perhaps a nightmare. There were unicorns and two-legged, beaver-like creatures that carried their young in pouches. Most incredible of all were the bat-winged humanoids, intelligent beings Herschel named the Vespertilio Homo. These lunar people had shimmering, copper-colored hair and wings of a thin, membranous material, and they appeared to live in peaceful harmony, building elaborate temples and conversing with each other. The articles even described bizarre bearded goats with fur the color of a summer sky. The public went wild with excitement. The Sun's circulation exploded, becoming the most widely read newspaper in the world for a brief, glorious period. Readers eagerly devoured every new installment, and the story was reprinted in papers across the country and in Europe. The line between science and fantasy had been completely erased. How could such an elaborate fiction be so widely accepted? The era was primed for it. The Victorian age was a time of breathtaking scientific advancement. Every month brought news of a new fossil discovery, a new chemical element, or a new theory about the nature of the universe. The public's appetite for these wonders was insatiable, but their scientific literacy was often limited. The hoax played perfectly into this climate, blending the authority of a famous scientist like Herschel with the kind of sensational, exotic details found in popular adventure novels. It felt plausible because people wanted it to be true. The dream could not last. Eventually, other newspapers grew skeptical and began to investigate. The supposed Edinburgh Journal did not exist, and the real Sir John Herschel, who was busy with astronomical work in South Africa, was completely unaware his name was being used to sell papers in New York. When the Sun was finally forced to admit the series was a fabrication, the public reaction was a fascinating mix of embarrassment and good-natured amusement. Many people laughed it off, recognizing the sheer audacity of the prank. The author was never officially named, but the credit is generally given to a reporter named Richard Adams Locke, who supposedly intended the series as a satire of the increasingly wild scientific speculations of the time. The Great Moon hoax stands as a landmark moment in the history of media. It demonstrated the immense power of the popular press to shape reality, to capture the public imagination, and to sell papers with a good story regardless of its truth. It revealed a deep public yearning to believe in the impossible, a Victorian trait that balanced their rigid rationality with a boundless sense of wonder. The hoax was not just a lie, it was a mirror reflecting an age that dreamed of blue goats on the moon and for a few glorious weeks believed it had found them. The longing for a miracle could resurrect the dead, or so it seemed in the case of Sir Roger Tichborne. The young aristocrat was believed to have perished in a shipwreck off the coast of South America in 1854, his body lost to the deep. His grieving mother, Lady Tichborne, refused to accept this fate. She clung to a fragile hope, placing advertisements in newspapers across the world, desperately seeking any news of her lost son. More than a decade later, from the rough outback of Australia, an answer seemed to arrive. A man known as Tom Castro, a butcher from Wagga Wagga, stepped forward. He was enormous, weighing over 300 pounds, and he claimed he was the long-lost Sir Roger, miraculously saved from the sea. The physical mismatch was staggering. The real Roger Tichborne had been a slender, delicate man, refined by a French education and fluent in the language. The claimant was a hulking figure who spoke no French and possessed coarse, unrefined manners. Yet when this man sailed to England to meet the mother who had longed for him, something extraordinary happened. Lady Tichborne, perhaps seeing only what her heart wished to see, accepted him without hesitation as her returned son. With her endorsement, the Tichborne claimant, as he became known, launched a legal battle to reclaim the family title and fortune. What followed was the longest court case in British history up to that time, a sprawling legal drama that utterly captivated the nation. The public was fiercely divided along class lines. The aristocracy and the upper classes saw the claimant for what he so clearly appeared to be, a crude impostor. But the working classes rallied to his cause with passionate fervor. To them, he was a symbol of hope, a man of the people challenging the rigid, unforgiving structures of the elite. He represented the intoxicating idea that a common man could become a lord, that the established order could be upended by a single, improbable story. The trial was a spectacle of absurdity and revelation. The claimant's knowledge of Roger's early life was full of bizarre errors and glaring gaps. He could not name his own school teachers or recall basic details of the family estate. Supporters explained these lapses as the understandable effects of amnesia and the hardships of shipwreck. For years, the legal battle dragged on, consuming vast sums of money and endless column inches in the press. Ultimately, the truth was undeniable. The man was exposed as Arthur Orton, the son of a London butcher, who had concocted an audacious plan to steal an inheritance. He was convicted of perjury and sentenced to 14 years in prison. Yet even after his release, a segment of the public still believed in him, a testament to the power of the story he had sold. The Tichborne case was far more than a simple fraud. It was a national obsession that laid bare the deep social fissures of Victorian Britain. It was about the very nature of identity in an age before fingerprints or photographs could offer definitive proof. And it spoke to a universal, almost mythic desire, the hope that those we have lost to the sea or to time might one day walk back into our lives against all odds and all reason. While the Tichborne case debated a man's true identity, a far more monstrous figure haunted the English countryside, a beast whose legend was carved into the very stones of a church. On August 4, 1577, the town of Bungay was caught in a storm of biblical fury. The sky turned an unnatural black, the wind howled, and hail battered the roofs. Inside St. Mary's Church, the congregation huddled in terror as the storm raged, their prayers drowned out by the thunder. Then the unthinkable happened. Witnesses described a sudden, blinding flash of lightning, and in that instant a monstrous shape materialized within the sacred walls. It was a gigantic black dog, its eyes burning like coals, its body radiating an infernal heat. The creature tore through the panicked worshippers with a savage fury. According to the contemporary account, it seized 2 men in its powerful jaws, breaking their necks and killing them instantly. A third man was caught in the beast's terrible grasp, and when the animal released him, he was left shriveled and contorted, as if all the moisture had been sucked from his body. As suddenly as it had appeared, the hellhound was gone, its departure marked by another peal of thunder and the lingering smell of sulfur and burnt flesh. The claw marks it left on the church door were said to be visible for centuries. This was not just a ghost story, it was a recorded event, a divine punishment or a demonic incursion made terrifyingly real for the people of Bungay. The tale of the black dog was a local legend for generations, but it was the Victorians who truly resurrected the beast. In an age obsessed with cataloguing the supernatural, the story was revived and widely circulated through cheap pamphlets and sensational newspaper articles. It fit perfectly into the Victorian imagination, a world where the rational and the irrational constantly collided. The legend embodied their fascination with omens, seeing the beast as a portent of death or disaster. It also spoke to the deep-seated anxiety about the boundaries between the divine and the demonic. How could a creature of hell invade a church, the one place meant to be a sanctuary from evil? The Victorians were wrestling with their faith in an increasingly scientific world, and stories like this one lived in that tense intersection of religion and folklore. The Black Dog of Bungay, known more broadly as Black Shuck, became a permanent fixture in the landscape of British myth. He was the archetype for all the phantom black dogs said to roam the country's lanes, a spectral predator whose appearance always signaled impending doom. The Victorians did not just believe the old stories, they collected them, printed them, and gave them a new life, ensuring that the terror of that stormy day in Bungay would never be forgotten. The phantom dogs and vanished villages of the Victorian era revealed a world where the past felt unnervingly close. This fascination with piercing the veil of time would find its ultimate expression in an event that occurred just after the era's close, a story so strange it seemed to fulfill the 19th century's deepest longing. In the summer of 1901, two highly respectable British academics, Charlotte Ann Moberly and Elena Jourdain, were visiting the Palace of Versailles. As they strolled through the gardens towards the Petit Trianon, the small chateau beloved by Marie Antoinette, the atmosphere around them began to shift in a way that was deeply, fundamentally wrong. The familiar sounds of the modern park faded, replaced by an oppressive and eerie silence. The light took on a strange, dreamlike quality, and the landscape itself seemed to alter, with features like a deserted kiosk and a worn footpath appearing where none existed on their map. Then they saw the people. A woman was shaking a white cloth out of a window, a man in a cloak and large hat gestured them away with a menacing air, and a young girl with an old-fashioned hairstyle sat sketching, oblivious to their presence. Most strikingly, they saw a beautiful, fair-haired woman in a lavish, antique dress seated on the grass, whom they would later become convinced was the ghost of Marie Antoinette herself. The entire experience was one of profound disorientation, a feeling of having stepped out of their own time. When they compared notes afterward, both women were deeply shaken. They had not just seen a ghost, they believed they had walked directly into a pocket of the past, a living memory of the French Revolution. They devoted the next decade of their lives to investigating their own experience, researching the history of the Trianon, the fashions of the period, and the exact layout of the gardens in 1789. Their book, published under pseudonyms, presented a meticulous case that they had witnessed a replay of a specific, terrible day, the 16th of October, the day the Queen was taken from the Trianon to be guillotined. How could two intelligent, sober-minded women share such a detailed and consistent hallucination? The explanations offered over the years are as varied as the experience itself. Skeptics point to a powerful combination of suggestion and imagination. The two friends were steeped in the history of the location, a place haunted by the tragic story of a queen. They may have unconsciously woven these romantic expectations into a shared psychic event, a collective daydream so vivid it felt entirely real. Others propose a more radical theory, that they genuinely experienced a time slip, a brief rent in the fabric of reality that allowed them to witness echoes of the past. Their account remains one of the most compelling and debated cases in the annals of the paranormal, not because it involved a rattling chain or a spooky noise, but because it was a fully immersive, multi-sensory journey into another century. The Moberly-Jourdain incident is in many ways the perfect culmination of the Victorian spirit. It channeled the era's passion for spiritualism, its obsession with history, and its burgeoning interest in the mysteries of the human psyche into a single, unforgettable story. It asks a question that still haunts us today. Is time a rigid line, or is it a landscape where some moments, charged with intense emotion, can leave a permanent impression, waiting for the right person at the right moment to stumble back into them? The same Victorian obsession with the unseen world did not die with the era. It simply found new forms. Decades later, on a grassy hill in Brazil, a mystery unfolded that could have been ripped from the pages of a penny dreadful, updated for the age of transistors and space races. In August 1966, two electronic technicians, Miguel José Viana and Manuel Pereira da Cruz, were found dead under circumstances so bizarre they defied any immediate explanation. They were seated side by side on a slope in Vintom Hill, their bodies perfectly composed. Each man wore a formal suit and a waterproof coat, and over their faces each wore a lead mask. A small notebook was found with them containing a single cryptic instruction. It stated they were to take capsules to protect themselves from radiation, and then to protect the metals by waiting for a specific signal. What kind of experiment or ritual were these two men engaged in? The investigation revealed more strange details. Empty water bottles and a damp cloth were found nearby, suggesting they had been waiting for some time. There was no sign of a struggle, and autopsies could find no cause of death beyond a simple, inexplicable heart failure. The capsules mentioned in the note were never found, leaving a gaping hole in the puzzle. The lead masks were the central, chilling artifact. Why lead? The answer connects this 20th century tragedy directly back to the Victorian mind. The 19th century was the era when radiation was first discovered, and its properties were being wildly explored. Scientists like Marie Curie handled radium with bare hands, unaware of its mortal danger. Lead was known even then as a shield against certain energies. These two technicians, dabbling in a fringe science that mixed electronics with esoteric ideas, may have believed they were protecting themselves from some form of energetic emission, perhaps from a device they were testing or an atmospheric event they hoped to witness. The theories about their deaths are as varied as they are unsettling. The official inquest labeled it a probable accident involving poisonous herbs, a conclusion that satisfied almost no one. Others wondered if it was a tragic scientific miscalculation, a homemade experiment to contact extraterrestrials or tap into some unknown energy field that went horribly wrong. The most haunting possibility involves the occult. Brazil has a rich history of spiritualist groups, a direct descendant of the Victorian seance craze. Were the men part of a secret society, following a ritual to achieve spiritual enlightenment or astral projection, using the lead masks to focus their psychic energy or protect their souls during a dangerous metaphysical journey? The note's reference to protecting metals and awaiting a signal feels like the jargon of such a group. The lead masks case is a perfect, chilling bridge across the centuries. It embodies the Victorian spirit of amateur scientific inquiry, pushing bravely into the unknown. It mirrors their deep fascination with secret societies and coded messages. And it reflects the same public appetite for a story that blends technology with the supernatural, creating a mystery that is, in the end, profoundly human. Two men went to a hilltop seeking a signal from beyond, and in their failure they sent a signal of their own, a silent testament to the enduring human desire to pierce the veil, no matter the cost. A thin blanket of snow covered the quiet county of Devon one February morning in 1855. The world had gone to sleep under a peaceful white shroud, but it awoke to a scene of utter bewilderment. Overnight, a single line of footprints had been stamped into the snow, a trail of devastation that stretched for over 100 miles. They were not the tracks of any known animal. Each print was a perfect cloven hoof mark, as if a gigantic two-legged goat had embarked upon a relentless, impossible journey. The prints marched across open fields, through dense gardens, and over the high walls of estates. They went straight up to the walls of houses and appeared to continue on the other side, as if the creature had walked directly through solid stone. They were even reported on the rooftops of homes and on the tops of haystacks, a path that defied all logic and geography. The immediate reaction was a surge of pure, superstitious terror. The devil himself had walked through Devon, and he had left his calling card in the snow. Panic spread through the villages. People refused to leave their homes after dark, and vicaries gave sermons about the wages of sin. The local newspapers were flooded with letters from terrified citizens demanding an explanation. The phenomenon became known instantly as the devil's footprints. How did the Victorian mind grapple with such a tangible yet inexplicable mystery? The debate was a perfect snapshot of the era's inner conflict. On one side was the old world, the world of folklore and religious dread that saw a demonic incursion. On the other was the new, scientific spirit that demanded a rational, natural cause. The theories put forward were as creative as they were varied. Some suggested it was an escaped kangaroo from a private menagerie, hopping on its two powerful legs. Others proposed a badger or an otter, whose tracks might have melted and merged in the peculiar weather to create the illusion of a single line of hoof prints. One of the most inventive explanations came from a local naturalist who speculated about an experimental balloon. He suggested that a broken rope from a weather balloon had been trailing through the snow, with a metal hook on the end that punched the distinctive marks into the ground at regular intervals as the balloon drifted for miles on the wind. Yet each of these theories had a fatal flaw. The sheer, unbroken length of the trail was staggering. The consistency of the prints, their appearance in such inaccessible places, and the fact that they were laid in a single, stormy night argued against any ordinary animal. The balloon theory could not account for the prints scaling walls or appearing on rooftops. The event was a meteorological mystery that refused to be solved. It tapped directly into the Victorian fascination with the boundary between the known and the unknown. Here was something that everyone could see, a physical fact stamped into the snow, yet its origin remained utterly elusive. It was a puzzle that their burgeoning science could not crack, a reminder that for all their progress, the world was still full of wonders and terrors they could not name. The Devil's Footprints of Devon remain one of history's most compelling unexplained events, not because of a ghost or a monster, but because of a trail of marks in the snow. It is a story about the power of a single, strange detail to ignite the imagination and to haunt a community for generations, a frozen moment where fear and curiosity walked hand in hand. While the Devil's Footprints were still a fresh memory, a theft of almost mathematical precision was being plotted against the very symbol of Victorian progress, the railway. This was the Great Train Robbery of 1855, a crime of pure audacity that targeted a shipment of gold bars traveling from London to the port of Folkestone, destined for Paris. The mastermind was a professional criminal named Edward Agar, a man who understood that the greatest heists are not about brute force, but about exploiting the system from within. His key to the kingdom was a railway guard named William Pierce, a man with access and a grudge. Agar cultivated Pierce, wining and dining him, and eventually bribing him to provide a staggering advantage: the wax impressions of the keys that unlocked the heavy bullion safes in the train's baggage car. For months, Agar had perfect duplicates made. The plan was set. On the night of the robbery, Agar and his accomplices, including Pierce, boarded the train as legitimate passengers. As the locomotive thundered through the darkness, they simply waited for the right moment. Using their coppered keys, they calmly opened the safes, but they did not just empty the boxes and flee. They had come prepared with a brilliant, cynical substitute lead shot. They carefully removed the gold bars, each one worth a fortune, and poured in an equal weight of lead pellets. They then relocked the safes, leaving no visible sign of the swap. The crime was so clean, so undetectable, that the theft was not even discovered until the safes were opened in Paris, revealing the worthless lead where gleaming gold should have been. The investigation that followed was initially baffled. The safe showed no signs of forced entry, and the seals had not been broken. It seemed like an impossible crime. The break came not from a mistake in the heist itself, but from Agar's downfall in an unrelated forgery case. Facing deportation, he decided to talk, unveiling the entire scheme and implicating his accomplices, including the treacherous guard William Pierce. The subsequent trial was a sensation, but the real shockwave came from the testimony that followed. To prove his story, Agar revealed an even deeper corruption. He explained how he had been introduced to Pierce by none other than the chief clerk of the Southeastern Railway's traffic manager, a man named James Burgess. The very official responsible for the security of the gold shipments had helped orchestrate their theft. The case exposed a stunning vulnerability, not in a lock or a safe, but in human greed. The impact was immediate and profound. The railway company was humiliated, and public trust in the infallibility of this new technology was shaken. The robbery forced a complete overhaul of security procedures for valuable shipments. The simple system of a single set of keys was abandoned in favor of complex dual control systems, where no one person could ever access the contents alone. The Great Train Robbery was strange not for any supernatural element, but for its chilling sophistication. It was a blueprint for the modern heist, a crime that used insider knowledge and psychological manipulation instead of violence. It proved that the most dangerous phantom haunting the railways was not a ghost, but a corrupt man with a key. Centuries before the Victorian era, a story was buried in the chronicles of medieval England, waiting to be unearthed and reimagined by a new age of seekers. In the 12th century, near the village of Woolpit, reapers working the fields made an impossible discovery. They found two children, a boy and a girl, huddled and terrified at the mouth of a wolf pit. Their skin was tinged a deep, unnatural green, and they wore clothing made from a strange, unfamiliar fabric. They spoke a language no one could comprehend, and they recoiled from all offers of food. For days, they seemed to be starving until someone brought them raw green beans from the field, which they devoured eagerly. It was the only sustenance they would accept. The boy, frail and despondent, gradually sickened and died. But the girl, stronger or perhaps more resilient, slowly adapted to her new world. As she learned to eat other foods, the green tint faded from her skin, replaced by a normal, healthy complexion. She also learned English, and when she could finally tell her story, it was more bewildering than anyone could have guessed. She claimed she and her brother came from a land she called St. Martin's Land, a place of permanent twilight where the sun never rose and the light was forever like the dim glow of dawn or dusk. She described how they had been tending their father's flocks when they heard a loud sound like bells and suddenly found themselves in the bright, overwhelming sunlight of the Woolpit field, unable to find their way back. For the Victorians, this was not just a quaint medieval fable. It was a tantalizing puzzle. Antiquarians and folklorists who were busy collecting and cataloguing every old tale from the British countryside seized upon the story of the Green Children. In an era obsessed with classification and explanation, how could they make sense of this account? The idea of a subterranean civilization captured their imaginations. What if the children were not from another country, but from another world entirely, one that existed deep beneath our feet? The perpetual twilight could be explained by a world lit only by phosphorescent rocks or filtered light from surface crevices. Their green skin might have been a result of a diet rich in copper or some other mineral unknown to surface dwellers. Their strange language and clothing only reinforced the idea of a completely isolated culture. This theory connected perfectly with the Victorian love for lost worlds, inspired by books like Journey to the Center of the Earth. It also dovetailed with a renewed fascination with fairy lore. Were these green children not descriptions of the very creatures from Celtic and British myths? Fairies were often said to live in hollow hills and emerge into our world, sometimes stealing human children. Here was a story that seemed to run in reverse, where the fairy folk themselves had stumbled into the human realm, confused and vulnerable. The girl's loss of her green color upon adopting a human diet mirrored the old belief that fairies who ate human food could become trapped in our world. The story of the green children of Woolpit is a perfect example of how the Victorian mind worked. They took a strange, unverifiable historical anecdote and applied their own unique blend of scientific curiosity and romanticism to it. They saw in it not just a mystery, but a potential key to understanding the boundaries of their world, proving that their hunger for the unexplained reached back through the centuries, giving new life to a very old and very green enigma. The vast southern oceans held a secret even more absolute than that of the Mary Celeste. In July 1909, a brand new Australian passenger liner, the SS Waratah, set sail on only her second voyage. She was a symbol of national pride and modern engineering, a 665-foot Leviathan dubbed the Australian Titanic for her luxury and size. Carrying 211 souls, she steamed confidently from Durban, South Africa, bound for Cape Town. The voyage was a short coastal run, and the weather was typically rough but manageable. Another ship, the Harlow, reported passing the Waratah and exchanging friendly signals. Then the sea simply swallowed her. She never arrived in Cape Town. She left behind no wreckage, no lifeboats, no floating debris, and no distress call. The Waratah and everyone on board had been erased from existence. The search that followed was one of the most extensive in maritime history. Multiple ships scoured the suspected route for weeks, combing the treacherous coastline and the open ocean. They found nothing, not a single plank of wood, not a single piece of furniture, not a single body. It was as if the massive ship had been lifted from the water by a divine or perhaps demonic hand. How could a modern, steel-hulled vessel, over 500 feet long, simply vanish without leaving a single clue? The theories that emerged were as dark and deep as the waters off the Cape of Good Hope, and area sailors already feared for its violent storms. The most plausible explanation pointed to a catastrophic structural failure. Some survivors from the Waratah's first voyage had reportedly expressed concerns about her stability, feeling she was top-heavy and rolled unnaturally in heavy seas. Perhaps a massive wave had simply broken her back, causing her to sink so quickly that no one could escape. Others whispered of a rogue wave, a mythical wall of water that could rise up without warning, tall enough to overwhelm and capsize even the largest ship. And then there were the more chilling, supernatural explanations. Some recalled a strange report from the captain of the Harlow, the last ship to see the Waratah alive. He mentioned seeing a strange, gleaming ship following the liner at a distance, a phantom vessel that vanished when he tried to get a closer look. Was this a ghost ship, an omen of doom that heralded the Waratah's fate? The loss of the Waratah captured the public's imagination precisely because it was so complete. The Mary Celeste was a mystery of abandonment, but the Waratah was a mystery of utter annihilation. In an age where steamships were taming the globe, her disappearance was a terrifying reminder of the ocean's ultimate power. The sea could take your most advanced technology, your brightest hopes, and your loved ones, and offer no explanation, no grave, and no peace. She remains one of the greatest maritime enigmas, a ghost ship that took its entire world with it into the silent, crushing depths. While the sea kept its most devastating secrets, a very different kind of haunting was taking root on dry land within the brick and mortar of a country rectory. Borley Rectory, a gloomy house built in Essex in 1862, would earn a title that still sends a shiver down the spine, the most haunted house in England. Its dark reputation was not born from a single dramatic event, but from a slow, creeping accumulation of strange phenomena that began in the late Victorian era and escalated for decades. The residents reported a cacophony of unexplained sounds, the phantom hoofbeats of a ghostly coach tearing up the drive, the frantic, unseen ringing of servant bells, and the soft, sorrowful apparition of a nun pacing the garden. Some whispered she was the spirit of a French nun walled up alive for eloping with a coachman from the previous Borley Hall, a tragic love story forever etched into the property's lore. The legend of Borley Rectory was truly cemented not by its frightened occupants, but by the arrival of a man who made a career out of the paranormal, Harry Price. A flamboyant and controversial psychic investigator, Price descended upon the rectory in the 1920s with a suitcase full of equipment and a flair for publicity. He documented everything from phantom footsteps and thrown objects to messages that seemed to appear on the walls themselves. His most famous claim was of a spirit communication that predicted the rectory would burn down and the body of a murdered woman would be found in the ruins. When the building did indeed catch fire in 1939, and a woman's jawbone was later discovered in the cellar, it seemed like a chilling confirmation of the supernatural. Price's best-selling book, The Most Haunted House in England, transformed Borley from a local curiosity into a national sensation, a must-see destination for ghost hunters and thrill seekers. Yet, as with so many Victorian mysteries, the polished facade began to crack under scrutiny. After Price's death, other investigators picked apart his methods, uncovering evidence of outright hoaxing. It was revealed that some of the phenomena, including the wall writings, had been faked by the teenage daughter of a later rector. Skeptics argued that Harry Price himself was a showman who may have planted evidence or encouraged trickery to sustain his own legend. The story of the murdered nun had no basis in any historical record, and the discovery of the bone was likely a macabre coincidence. So, if so much was fabricated, why does Borley Rectory still hold such power over our imagination? The answer lies not in the truth of the ghosts, but in the deep Victorian desire they represented. Borley became the perfect symbol of the spiritualist age, a physical place where people could go to find proof of the afterlife. It was a theater for the era's anxieties and hopes, a stage where the living could interact with the dead, even if some of the actors were frauds. The rectory's enduring legacy is a testament to a powerful human need, the longing to believe that something, anything, lies beyond the silence of the grave. The tranquil setting of a wealthy home could hide a poisoner just as easily as a London alley. In 1876, the grand house known as the Priory became the stage for a classic Victorian mystery, the strange and agonizing death of the young barrister Charles Bravo. He was a man of new money and sharp ambition, married to a beautiful and wealthy widow named Florence. Their life in the suburb of Balham appeared to be one of perfect respectability, but beneath the surface festered secrets that would erupt in a very public and very painful scandal. Bravo's death was not a quiet one. For 3 days he suffered excruciating cramps, violent vomiting, and relentless thirst, a textbook case of antimony poisoning, a metallic substance as cruel as arsenic. He died in his bed, surrounded by the very people who might have wished him dead. The investigation immediately revealed a tangled web of motives and suspects, each with a reason to want Charles Bravo silenced. The first and most obvious suspect was his wife, Florence. Before her marriage to Bravo, she had been deeply involved with a man named Dr. James Gully, a celebrated physician and a figure in the fashionable world of hydrotherapy. Their affair had been a passionate one, but it was a social liability. To marry the respectable Bravo, Florence had been forced to sever her ties with Gully, but the gossip remained. Had she poisoned her new husband to regain her freedom and her fortune? Or perhaps the motive was more direct. Had Bravo discovered the affair was not entirely over? Then there was the housekeeper, Mrs. Cox, A constant, watchful presence in the household, she was the one who first raised the alarm, but her testimony was riddled with inconsistencies. She claimed that Bravo had told her he had taken poison accidentally, but then changed her story. She was also deeply indebted to Florence Bravo, and her position in the house depended entirely on her mistress's goodwill. Would she have administered the poison to secure her own future? And of course, there was the former lover himself, Dr. Gully. Had his jealousy over losing Florence and her fortune driven him to murder? He had the medical knowledge to obtain and administer antimony with precision. The subsequent inquest was a media sensation, laying bare the private shames of the upper middle class for all of Britain to devour. The public was treated to sordid details of adultery, financial control, and domestic misery. Florence Bravo's character was publicly dismantled, her past with Dr. Gully presented as evidence of a morally corrupt woman. Yet, despite weeks of testimony and intense public scrutiny, no one was ever charged with the crime. The evidence was entirely circumstantial, a mass of conflicting statements with no smoking gun. The jury's final verdict was one of the most frustrating in legal history: willful murder by a person or persons unknown. So why does the Bravo case continue to fascinate us? It is the perfect, unsolvable whodunit. It has all the elements of a classic murder mystery: a confined setting, a limited number of suspects, a brutal method, and a complex web of relationships. Every theory has its flaws. If Florence did it, why would she choose such a slow and agonizing poison, drawing attention to the crime? If Mrs. Cox was the killer, what was her true motive beyond vague loyalty? And if it was Dr. Gully, how could he have entered the house and poisoned Bravo without being seen? There is even the haunting possibility that Charles Bravo took the poison himself, a dramatic act of suicide meant to frame his wife for his death, a final, cruel act of control from beyond the grave. The case remains open, a dark puzzle of love, money, and betrayal, forever sealed in the silent, elegant rooms of the Priory. The camera was becoming a new kind of eye, one that could capture truth or conjure the most beautiful of lies. In the summer of 1917, two young cousins in the English village of Cottingley created a small piece of magic that would enchant the world. Elsie Wright, 16, and her 10-year-old cousin Frances Griffiths borrowed Elsie's father's midge camera and went to the beck at the bottom of their garden. When the first photograph was developed, it showed Frances peacefully watching as four delicate, winged fairies danced before her. A second picture, taken a few months later, depicted Elsie herself with a playful gnome. Arthur Wright, a practical man, was deeply skeptical and dismissed the images as a prank. But the girl's mother was a member of the Theosophical Society, a group deeply interested in the spiritual and supernatural, and she brought the photographs to a lecture. From there, they found their way into the hands of the most unlikely of champions, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. The creator of the supremely logical Sherlock Holmes was at that moment preparing an article on fairies for the Strand magazine. He was a devoted spiritualist yearning for proof of life after death, especially after losing his son in the First World War. To him, these two clear, simple photographs were not a childish hoax, but the scientific evidence he and the world so desperately needed. The world in 1920, reeling from the unprecedented slaughter of the war, was a place of shattered faith and profound grief. The idea that magic still existed, that delicate fairies could flutter in an English garden, offered a powerful antidote to the industrial horror of the trenches. Conan Doyle's enthusiastic endorsement in his published article launched the Cottingley fairies into an international sensation. The public wanted to believe. The photographs were examined by experts who, while cautious, could find no obvious signs of manipulation with the technology of the day. How could two young girls from a tiny village fool the world? They could because the world was willing, even eager, to be fooled. For decades, the cousins maintained their story, even as they grew into adulthood, adding a few more photographs to the collection. The mystery lingered, a charming footnote to an age of reason that secretly longed for wonder. The truth, when it finally came in the 1980s, was as simple as it was ingenious. The elderly women confessed that the fairies were paper cutouts carefully drawn by Elsie, who had a talent for art. They had fastened them to the ground with hatpins, and the slightly blurred quality of the images hid the crude method perfectly. They admitted the first 4 photos were fakes, though Frances maintained until her death that the 5th and final picture was genuine. Their motive was not fame or malice, but initially a simple desire to stop the grown-ups from scolding them for getting their clothes wet down by the stream. They never imagined their private game would spiral into a global phenomenon, and they felt a deep regret over deceiving the kindly, hopeful Conan Doyle. So why does this simple hoax, so clearly explained, still hold such a powerful grip on our imagination? The Cottingley fairies are more than a story of 2 girls and their paper dolls. They are the ultimate expression of that Victorian and Edwardian desire to find the supernatural in the scientific, to use the modern tool of the camera to prove the existence of the ancient magical world. The photographs are a window into a collective longing, a testament to the fact that sometimes the most compelling mysteries are not those that are solved, but those we desperately wish were real. Decades before Spring-Heeled Jack, another phantom stalked London streets, one whose weapon was not fire but a sharp blade. Between 1788 and 1790, a figure known only as the London Monster terrorized the city's women. His method was bizarre and deeply unsettling. He would follow a woman, often one walking alone at night, and without a word of warning, he would strike. Using a knife, a sharpened spike, or sometimes just a strong pin, he would slash at their clothing, tearing their skirts and petticoats, and frequently stabbing or cutting their buttocks. The attacks were not meant to be fatal, but they were profoundly violating, leaving the victims shocked, humiliated, and bleeding. The city descended into a state of mass hysteria. Women began carrying petticoats lined with tin or copper plates for protection, a desperate armor against the unseen predator. The public and the press whipped each other into a frenzy, with newspapers offering rewards for the monster's capture and publishing sensational accounts of every new assault. This atmosphere of fear led to a flood of false accusations and mob justice, where any man who looked at a woman strangely might find himself surrounded by an angry crowd. The panic was a perfect storm, fueled by the new reality of urban life, where crowds provided anonymity for a criminal and vulnerability for his targets. After more than 50 reported attacks, a man named Rinwick Williams was finally arrested and put on trial. The evidence against him was largely circumstantial, relying on identifications from victims who had seen their assailant only for a fleeting moment in the dark. Williams maintained his innocence, but he was found guilty and sentenced to transportation. Yet many wondered if the right man had truly been caught, or if society had simply needed a scapegoat to end the nightmare. The story of the London Monster did not end in the 18th century. It was a tale the Victorians loved to retell, a dark folklore passed down through penny dreadfuls and sensational histories. He was a direct precursor to Jack the Ripper, tapping into the exact same societal fears that would grip London a century later. He represented the terrifying randomness of urban violence and the chilling anonymity of the modern city. In a world where gas lamps were pushing back the shadows, the monster proved that the darkest dangers were not supernatural, but human, hiding in plain sight within the bustling, heartless crowd. That same Victorian fear of science gone horribly wrong found a chilling new home in the digital age. A terrifying story began to circulate online in the early 2000s, a piece of fiction known as the Russian sleep experiment. This modern creepypasta tells of Soviet researchers in the 1940s who sealed 5 political prisoners in an airtight chamber. Their goal was to test a new stimulant gas, a chemical designed to keep a person awake for 30 consecutive days. The gas worked perfectly, but the psychological cost was beyond any prediction. after just 5 days, the subjects began showing signs of extreme paranoia, whispering to themselves and begging to be released. By the 9th day, one had started screaming for hours on end, while another had torn pages from a book and pasted them to his body with his own filth, a desperate attempt to create a protective layer. The researchers, blinded by their ambition, did not stop the experiment. They continued pumping in the gas until the 15th day, when the screams from inside the chamber suddenly fell silent. When the scientists finally opened the door, they were met with a scene of pure nightmare. One subject was dead, his chest torn open. The other 4 were still alive, but they were no longer human in any recognizable sense. They had mutilated themselves, tearing their own skin and muscle away. They showed no reaction to pain, and they begged the researchers to keep pumping in the gas, insisting they needed to stay awake to remain safe from the horrors of their own dreams. When the scientists tried to sedate them, the subjects fought back with monstrous strength, screaming that sleep was the real enemy. The story ends with one of the creatures looking at its captors and asking a single, haunting question. Why did you stop the experiment? This entire tale is a work of fiction, a ghost story for the internet era. Yet its power comes directly from the anxieties first explored in Victorian Gothic literature. The Russian sleep experiment is a direct descendant of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Both stories feature a scientist who pushes past all ethical boundaries in the name of progress, only to create a monster they can no longer control. In Shelley's novel, Victor Frankenstein pieces together a new life from stolen body parts, only to be horrified by his own creation. In the sleep experiment, the Soviet researchers do not build a monster from corpses. They create one from the fragile human mind, warping their subjects into something inhuman through the simple act of denying them rest. The Victorian era was a time of breathtaking scientific discovery, but it was also a period of deep unease about where that progress might lead. The public marveled at new technologies, but they also feared the unknown consequences of tampering with the natural order. Stories like Frankenstein gave that fear a voice and a face. The Russian sleep experiment does the exact same thing, updating the terror for a world familiar with psychological warfare and chemical testing. It taps into our modern worry about what governments might do in secret laboratories and the ancient primal fear of losing our own minds. These stories endure because they ask a question we are still grappling with today. How far is too far in the pursuit of knowledge? The fictional Soviet researchers, like Victor Frankenstein before them, believed their work was for the greater good. They saw human subjects as a means to an end. The horror of both tales lies not in the monster itself, but in the realization that the true monster is the unbridled ambition of the scientist, the willingness to sacrifice humanity for a discovery. We are still captivated by these cautionary tales because they remind us that the most profound mysteries are not about ghosts or aliens, but about the darkness that can reside within the human soul when it dares to play God. A box at the Paris Opera was the stage for a different kind of performance, one where the audience itself became the spectacle. Throughout the late 19th century, a peculiar legend circulated among the city's elite, a ghost story whispered during intermissions. It concerned a woman of breathtaking beauty, always seen alone, seated in a private box often associated with the composer Giacomo Meyerbeer. She was the picture of elegance, dressed in the finest fashions of the day, her attention fixed intently upon the drama unfolding on the stage below. Yet if an admirer dared to look away for only a moment, she would be gone. When they glanced back at her seat, the box would be empty, with no trace of her departure and no logical explanation for her instantaneous disappearance. She was the vanishing lady, a phantom of the balcony. How could a society so obsessed with visibility and social codes produce a ghost who thrived in its most public arena? The tale perfectly channeled the Victorian appetite for melodrama, blending the opulence of high society with the chilling thrill of the supernatural. This was not a spectre haunting a lonely moor or a dusty castle, but one who appeared in the very heart of cultural life, a reminder that mystery could penetrate even the most crowded and well-lit rooms. The story's connection to Meyerbeer added another layer of intrigue, tying the ethereal woman to a composer known for his grand and often dark operas. It suggested that the art itself had conjured her, that the passions played out on the stage could somehow bleed into the real world, leaving behind a lingering, beautiful echo. This was the essence of the Victorian ghost story, a seamless fusion of the real and the imagined, where the setting was as important as the spectre. The Paris Opera was a temple of artifice and emotion, a place where people went to be seen and to feel. The legend of the vanishing lady gave them something new to feel, a collective shiver of wonder, proving that the most captivating mysteries are often those dressed in silk and seated just a few boxes away. The Crystal Palace rose in Hyde Park like a dream of the future, a cathedral of glass and iron built to house the world's greatest wonders. For the Victorians, the Great Exhibition of 1851 was a breathtaking display of their own industrial and imperial power, a monument to progress. Yet for all its soaring ambition, the event was also profoundly strange, a cabinet of curiosities on a gargantuan scale. The building itself was the first marvel, a temporary structure of prefabricated parts so vast it enclosed entire elm trees under its vaulted roof. Inside, over 100,000 exhibits from across the globe vied for attention, creating a sensory overload of the beautiful, the useful, and the utterly bizarre. One of the most peculiar inventions on display was the Tempest Prognosticator, a barometer designed by a Victorian eccentric named George Merriweather. This device did not rely on mercury or air pressure, but on 12 leeches housed in glass bottles. The theory was that the sensitive creatures would become agitated by approaching storms, climbing their bottles and triggering a series of bells to warn of the coming tempest. It was a perfect fusion of natural philosophy and sheer oddity, a machine powered by animal intuition. Visitors could also marvel at early prototypes that must have seemed like pure magic, such as a machine that could fold envelopes at an unimaginable rate, or a precursor to the fax machine that could transmit handwriting over a telegraph wire. Alongside these technological prophecies were exotic treasures from every corner of the empire, from massive Koh-i-Noor diamond to ornate furniture carved from coal. The exhibition was a powerful symbol of Victorian optimism, a belief that industry and invention could solve any problem and tame any wilderness. It projected an image of a society confidently marching toward a brighter, more ordered future. But this confidence was shadowed by a curious naivete. The sheer jumble of objects, from revolutionary steam hammers to decorative soup tureens, revealed a culture that had not yet learned to separate the profoundly significant from the merely novel. They saw no contradiction in placing a life-sized statue of a rhinoceros, a scientific wonder, next to an ornate bedstead shaped like a seashell. For them, it was all part of the same magnificent progress, a world where leeches could predict the weather and a palace made of glass could briefly hold the entire world under one magnificent and very strange roof. The polished gleam of the Crystal Palace could not erase the darker, secretive currents that flowed from the Victorian age into the modern world. Decades later, on a warm December morning in 1948, the body of a well-dressed man was discovered leaning against a seawall on Somerton Beach in Adelaide, Australia. He was perfectly groomed in a fine suit and tie with no identification of any kind. All the labels had been carefully cut from his clothing. In his pocket was a bus ticket and a slip of paper torn from a book, printed with two cryptic words, Tamam Shud, which means ended or finished in Persian. The coroner concluded he had died from a mysterious, undetectable poison, a perfect, untraceable murder. The police later found the very book the scrap had been torn from, a rare edition of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, abandoned in a car near the scene. Inside the back cover, faintly penciled, was a code, a series of seemingly random letters that defied every attempt at decryption by military and civilian codebreakers for generations. Who was this man, and what brought him to a quiet Australian beach to die from a spy's poison? The mystery only deepened with a potential identification. A local woman came forward, shown a plaster cast of the man's face. She admitted she knew him, but refused to reveal his name, claiming she had been told to keep silent by authorities. She also possessed a copy of the same rare edition of the Rubaiyat, inscribed to her by a former lover, an enigmatic figure who had vanished from her life. Was the Somerton man a jilted lover, or was his connection to this woman something far more sinister? The most compelling theories paint him as a casualty of the burgeoning Cold War, a spy operating in the shadowy world of post-war intelligence. His death, the erased identity, and the unbreakable code all point to a professional, state-sanctioned operation. This was not a new game, but an old one. The roots of this kind of espionage stretch back to the Victorian era's great game, the clandestine struggle for imperial dominance between Britain and Russia. The Victorians perfected the art of the invisible agent, the coded message, and the political assassination, techniques that were refined and passed down through 2 world wars. The Somerton man feels like a ghost from that earlier age, a Victorian spy tragically out of time, his mission and his identity swallowed by the same silent, indifferent secrecy that claimed diplomats like Benjamin Bathurst a century before. His body was eventually exhumed in the 21st century, and through advanced DNA testing, a name was finally proposed. Yet even this modern revelation feels incomplete, a possible identity that does not fully explain the code, the poison, or the woman who knew his secret. The Tamam Shud case remains a haunting, open file, a 20th century mystery that whispers of 19th century secrets, proving that some stories, like some poisons, are designed to leave no trace. A low, persistent drone began to trouble the residents of Taos, New Mexico in the early 1990s, a sound without a source that would not go away. This was the Taos hum, a low-frequency noise heard by only about 2% of the local population, a select group of hearers tormented by a vibration that seemed to emanate from the very air itself. For them, it was a constant, maddening presence, a rumble like a distant diesel engine that was forever idling just beyond perception. They described it as a burden that disrupted their sleep, shattered their concentration, and left them feeling isolated in their own homes, unable to escape a sound that no one else could hear. This was not a new phenomenon, merely a newly named one. Decades before the hum was documented, similar unexplained sounds were reported across the globe. In India, for generations, people living near the Ganges Delta reported hearing what they called the Barasul guns, sudden, booming reports that rolled across the sky like cannon fire on a clear, calm day. These mysterious detonations, with no storm or military exercise to explain them, baffled colonial officials and scientists alike, becoming a staple of Victorian scientific journals that catalogued the world's oddities. The hearers of the Taos hum faced the same profound frustration their Victorian predecessors knew, the struggle to prove an invisible, personal reality to a skeptical world. Is the hum a collective delusion, a form of mass tinnitus, or is it something tangible vibrating through the earth or the atmosphere? The scientific explanations are as varied as they are inconclusive. Some researchers point to industrial sources, massive machinery operating hundreds of miles away, its low-frequency waves traveling incredible distances. Others propose geological causes, the slow, grinding movement of tectonic plates or the hum of the earth itself, a constant seismic vibration normally below human hearing that somehow becomes amplified for a few. There are even theories about very low-frequency radio waves used for submarine communication, a modern technology leaking into the auditory range of a sensitive few. Each theory offers a potential key, yet none has managed to fully unlock the mystery. The enduring puzzle of the Taos hum reveals a fundamental truth about our relationship with the unknown. The Victorian drive to find a rational, scientific explanation for every phenomenon, from phantom footsteps to celestial hoaxes, did not end with their era, it simply evolved. Today, we use spectral analysis and seismic monitors instead of spirit boards and leech-powered barometers, but the quest is identical. We still look at a strange event and ask not if it is magic, but what law of physics we have yet to understand. These auditory mysteries, from the Burrisel guns to the Tau's hum, are more than just unsolved cases. They are reminders that our world is still filled with vibrations and frequencies just beyond the edge of our ordinary senses, waiting for the right ear or the right theory to finally listen. A ghost ship can be a derelict vessel, but the Octavius was a frozen tomb. In 1775, the whaling ship Herald encountered this legendary spectre adrift off the coast of Greenland. The crew of the Herald, braving the eerie silence, made their way aboard and stepped into a scene preserved in ice for 13 years. The entire crew of the Octavius was frozen solid, their bodies locked in the positions of their final, desperate moments. The captain was discovered at his desk in his cabin, his pen still in his hand, as if he had been writing in his logbook when the cold finally claimed him. Other sailors were found huddled below decks, wrapped in threadbare blankets, their faces etched with a permanent agony. The most chilling detail of all was the captain's log. The final entry was dated 1762, and it revealed an astonishing and fatal ambition. The Octavius had not been lost in the Atlantic, but had been attempting to conquer the treacherous Northwest Passage. They had sailed from the west, a bold and nearly impossible feat. The log suggested they had become trapped in the Arctic ice, condemned to drift helplessly with the pack for years until the relentless cold slowly extinguished every life on board. The ship had then completed its ghostly journey on its own, breaking free of the ice and emerging on the Atlantic side, a silent, grisly monument to a failed expedition. Why would this story from the 1700s resonate so deeply with the Victorians? The tale was perfectly tailored to their era's obsessions. The 19th century was the great age of Arctic exploration, a time when men like Sir John Franklin vanished while seeking the very same passage. The Octavius served as a perfect, terrifying cautionary tale. It was a stark reminder of the absolute power of nature, a force that could reduce human ambition to a collection of ice statues. It spoke to the specific Victorian fear of a slow, frozen death, lost to the white silence of the ice. The story was reprinted in popular magazines and seafaring journals, its details amplified with each retelling. It was not just a ghost story, it was a prophecy of what could happen to any ship that challenged the polar regions. The frozen crew of the Octavius became a powerful symbol, a warning from the past that echoed through every new expedition that sailed into the unforgiving Arctic mists. The same stone that built empires could also hold a secret in plain sight. On the grounds of Shugborough Hall in Staffordshire, an elegant 18th-century monument stands in the pastoral quiet, a marble relief depicting a romanticized version of Nicholas Powson's famous painting, The Shepherds of Arcadia. But it is not the art that captivated the Victorians, it is the sequence of letters carved into the slab beneath it. 8 characters that form no known word, OUOSVAVV, a code that has defied solution for more than 2 centuries. This was the Shugborough inscription, a riddle carved in stone that became a perfect obsession for an age that loved nothing more than a good puzzle. The Anson family, who owned the estate, were at the center of the mystery. The monument was commissioned by Admiral George Anson, a famed naval hero, and later adorned by his brother Thomas. But why would a wealthy, respected family place such a blatantly cryptic message on their property? The Victorians, with their burgeoning interest in archaeology and secret societies, let their imaginations run wild. One of the most popular theories suggested a connection to the Knights Templar. Perhaps the Ansons were part of a hidden lineage, and the code was a map or a message left by the medieval order, a clue to the location of their fabled treasure, or even the Holy Grail itself. The presence of the Poussin painting, itself the subject of Grail theories in the book The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, only fueled these speculative fires. Other explanations were more personal, yet equally cryptic. Some believed it was a dedication from Thomas Anson to his deceased wife. The letters could be an acronym for a Latin or Greek phrase expressing eternal love and sorrow. One proposed solution was the Latin phrase, oro ut omnes sequata velant ad vitam veram, which translates to, I pray that all may follow their desire for the true life. Another was optimi uxoris optimi sororis vidus amantissimus vavat virtutibus, meaning best of wives, best of sisters, a most devoted widower vows to your virtues. These poetic interpretations painted a picture of a grieving husband, encoding his love in a language of stone. Yet none of these translations has ever been universally accepted, leaving the door open for more fantastical ideas. This enigma pulled in some of the greatest minds of the era. The brilliant codebreaker Charles Babbage, often called the father of the computer, reportedly turned his analytical mind to the inscription, attempting to crack it with his proto-computational logic. The novelist Charles Dickens, a man fascinated by the clandestine and the mysterious, was known to have discussed the puzzle with his literary circles. Even the naturalist Charles Darwin, a man who devoted his life to deciphering the code of nature itself, was said to have taken an interest in this man-made cipher during his visits to the estate. The Shugborough inscription became a cultural touchstone, a drawing-room mystery that united scientists, authors, and aristocrats in a common, frustrating quest. Ultimately, the code's power does not come from a potential solution, but from its perfect reflection of the Victorian spirit. It combined a reverence for classical art with a passion for cryptography. It blended the romantic allure of a possible treasure hunt with the intellectual challenge of a logic problem. In an age of new discoveries, the inscription represented the tantalizing possibility that the past was still speaking, if only one could learn to listen. It was a mystery carved not in some remote cave, but in the garden of a country home, a silent, stubborn question mark that continues to challenge all who look upon it, asking if the greatest secrets are those we choose to display for all the world to see. The American soil itself seemed to offer up a biblical mystery in October 1869, when workers digging a well on a farm in Cardiff, New York, struck stone. What they unearthed was a colossal figure, a man of stone over 10 feet tall, his features frozen in a silent grimace. Word spread like wildfire that a petrified giant from a lost age had been discovered. For a public steeped in literal interpretations of the Bible, the giant was stunning proof. Was this one of the Nephilim, the giants mentioned in the book of Genesis who once walked the earth? The discovery ignited a fierce debate that was simmering just below the surface of Victorian society, pitting devout faith against the rising tide of scientific skepticism. Crowds flocked to the farm, paying 50 cents each to gaze upon the marvel, and the owners grew rich from the spectacle. The giant's authenticity was championed by some scientists and preachers alike, each seeing in its stony face a confirmation of their own worldview. Yet the truth was far more mischievous. The Cardiff giant was not a fossilized ancestor, but an elaborate and cynical hoax. Its creator was a New York tobacconist and atheist named George Hull. Annoyed by the rigid fundamentalism of a revivalist preacher, Hull decided to craft the ultimate argument against blind faith. He commissioned a block of gypsum from Iowa, had it secretly carved into the giant by stonecutters in Chicago, and then aged it with acid, sand, and ink to give it an ancient, weathered appearance. He then buried it on his cousin's farm and waited a year for the earth to settle before staging the discovery. When experts began to expose the fraud, pointing out that the stone was not ancient fossilized bone but a relatively fresh piece of gypsum, the story took another bizarre turn. The showman P.T. Barnum, a master of Victorian spectacle, offered to buy the giant. When the owners refused, Barnum simply created a perfect plaster replica of the fake and displayed it in his museum as the real Cardiff giant, claiming the one in New York was the copy. The public, thoroughly confused but no less entertained, now had two giants to choose from. The whole affair laid bare the tensions of the era. It was a battle between the desire for miraculous proof of scripture and the emerging tools of empirical science that could debunk it. The giant's brief reign as a sensation revealed a public court in the middle, eager to believe in wonders but increasingly armed with a healthy skepticism. The Cardiff giant was more than a statue. It was a mirror reflecting a society wrestling with its own beliefs. A perfect stone-faced symbol of an age where faith, fraud, and science were locked in a strange and profitable dance. A different kind of phantom stalked the gaslit alleys of Whitacapel in the autumn of 1888, one whose crimes would eclipse all others to become the era's defining horror. Over a few terrifying months, a series of murders unfolded with a brutality that shocked the world. The victims were poor women, their lives already marked by hardship, but their deaths were carved into history with a surgical precision that suggested a mind both educated and utterly deranged. The killer seemed to move like a ghost through the crowded, squalid streets, striking and then vanishing without a trace, leaving behind only butchered bodies and a city paralyzed with fear. The police were overwhelmed, their efforts a frantic scramble in the fog, hampered by primitive forensic methods and a labyrinth of narrow courts where a man could disappear in an instant. Then the letters began to arrive, taunting, mocking messages sent to the police and newspapers, signed with the name that would echo through time, Jack the Ripper. The most chilling of all was the From Hell letter, which accompanied a small box containing half a human kidney, supposedly taken from one of the victims. It was a piece of the crime scene, delivered to the authorities as a grisly trophy. The public's terror was now mixed with a morbid, feverish fascination. The newspapers, eager to sell copies, printed every rumor and every ghastly detail, turning the unknown killer into a grotesque celebrity. The hunt for the Ripper became a frantic obsession, generating a dizzying array of suspects that reflected the deep anxieties of the age. Was he a deranged doctor using his anatomical knowledge to mutilate? This theory pointed a finger at royal physicians, even implicating a member of the royal family himself in a vast conspiracy to silence a scandal. Was he a foreigner, a Polish immigrant or a Russian anarchist bringing a foreign evil to London's heart? Or was he simply a local butcher or a madman, hiding in plain sight within the very community he terrorized? The list of plausible and implausible suspects grew to over 100, yet not a single one could be conclusively proven guilty. Beyond the gruesome details and the endless speculation, the Jack the Ripper case held up a stark mirror to Victorian society. The murders exposed the profound social inequality festering in the world's greatest empire. While the wealthy classes enjoyed the fruits of progress, the residents of Whitacapel lived in desperate, overcrowded poverty, ignored by the authorities until a killer made their neighborhood a place of international infamy. The Ripper's choice of victims, women on the very margins of society, highlighted their vulnerability and the grim realities of life for the poor. He was a monster born from the shadows of progress, a chilling reminder that for all its gaslight and grandeur, the Victorian age had a deep, dark underbelly it refused to see. In the end, the greatest mystery of Jack the Ripper is not who he was, but how he vanished so completely. He stepped out of the fog, committed his atrocities, and then melted back into it, leaving no identity, only a legacy of terror. He is the ultimate Victorian ghost, a shadowy figure who represents all the unanswered questions and unresolved fears of his time. He is the proof that some mysteries are never meant to be solved, that some stories end not with a conclusion but with an eternal, haunting silence. And there you have it, 30 strange and captivating events from the Victorian era, a world that was so much more than corsets and tea parties. It was a time of profound duality, where the brilliant light of scientific discovery cast long, deep shadows of superstition and fear. In this crucible of change, where steam engines roared while spiritualists whispered to the dead, mysteries were born that have refused to die. These stories, from ghost ships to phantom leapers, are not just forgotten curiosities. They are the echoes of an age grappling with its own soul, a permanent record of humanity's endless fascination with the unexplained. So, which of these events shocked or intrigued you the most? Do you have a personal theory about the silent fate of the Mary Celeste crew, or a compelling suspect for the elusive Jack the Ripper? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We would love to hear your perspective. If you enjoyed this journey into the bizarre corridors of history, please show your support by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and hitting that notification bell. That way, you will not miss our next historical deep dive into the secrets of the past. Until next time, keep questioning.